welcome to the Let Me Ask You This podcast. I am your host, Chris Del Pozo, and today I have a very special guest, my good buddy, Joey.
How's it going, buddy?
This is for our podcast, so we got to make things official.
Sure.
So Joey is a USF alum, right? He graduated with his bachelor's in business and management, right?
Yep.
And now you're pursuing your MBA.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. MBA with a concentration in cybersecurity, actually.
Nice.
But yeah, yep. I'm about 8 classes left.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So just for everybody to understand, the goal for this podcast is to really to expand on psychology, how psychology falls into your day-to-day life. And then we're going to talk a little bit about therapy, how therapy plays into people's lives, and some misunderstandings about therapy that we are going to debunk. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in, all right? So I've got some questions for you that's going to pertain to your field specifically. I just want to get your feedback on it and just kind of your thought process on how you got to your answers, right? So let's start with the first one. This is going to be kind of like a leadership question. How did you motivate your team for the best performance?
That's a great question. So me and you had the opportunity, or you and I had the opportunity to work together in numerous different places. And I think that in coming up through the ranks, what it really taught me is that at the end of the day, there's a bunch of management techniques. There's a bunch of things that you can look up in a textbook. But at the end of the day, the people that we're dealing with are just that. They're people. And so in finding out kind of how to motivate a team, it was really apparent to me pretty early on that the ways to motivate a team are actually to earn their respect, just as you would with a friend or a family member or what have you. And like one of the craziest things is that we worked together in probably the first instance that I was able to manage a business. And we worked with, for all intents and purposes, we worked with a group of friends. And going to work was like hanging out with friends and being able to create that environment. And so to kind of sum up my long answer and to really summarize, people work hard for people that they respect. People that they know also work hard and match their level of intensity. People that know that you have their best interests in mind and that ultimately you're going to do right by them at any chance that you do, and also that you're going to explain the reasoning behind things that you do when you do them, and ultimately keep the fabric of the team together. And so by really creating that environment, we found in our management career, you were a manager as well, we found that we had a group of people that would come to work and run through brick walls for us. They would do anything for us. And in turn, we would do anything for them to make their lives a little bit better. We would listen to their feedback. We would be on the front line with them doing the exact same job. And so I look back on my management career and really it's hallmarked by a couple of things. It's hallmarked by working alongside our teammates, understanding the first line problems that we're dealing with or that our teams are dealing with, and it's hallmarked by just overall striving each and every interaction that you have with an employee, a customer, somebody who does business, to be just an honorable person in general. And I just think that it can't be undersung. There's so many folks who don't think about the way that the team perceives them, and I think that's what it kind of comes down to, is you've got to have your team who wants to have your back.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. There's a couple things in there that I wanted to touch base on, but the first one I'm going to touch base on real quick is going to be I'm just going to give a little kickback on your statement earlier where you said that you found it to be almost like a friendship, right, when we were working at the facility, and I would agree with you because it was a very friendly environment. Now, I would say I feel like there's a lot of people who would question whether or not, how do you draw the line between that friendship and work association? Because there is that fine line between management and associate, where you can have a friendship, but it can be abused how do you draw that line so that it's not ever crossed for those associates?
That's a great that's a great question too. So yeah, it's funny that you say it was kind of like a French important distinction to make in that specific facility that we worked for is that some of our employees, maybe majority of them, were actually friends. Whether it was friends from high school or like around the area or what have you, folks that we knew outside of work. Um, so that actually it's a great point that you bring up because they were friends of ours before they were employees. And they were we knew of them and we had relationships with them. They had perceptions of us before they ever came into the workplace. And what I think that we did very successfully with that company was we were able to very clearly draw the line between play and business. And that specific company has a motto that is essentially it breaks down to we work hard and we play hard.
So I guess let me rephrase it this way because I agree with you, right? We worked with a lot of people that were friends with us outside of work as well as at work. Some were prior and some were even during. Now, I would say personally myself, I ran into some individuals that when I created a strong bond with them, I had a difficult time being able to get the management respect that I needed in order to accomplish my goals because they felt like they were so close that they could just get away with doing less because of the relationship. And again, so like where this would even pertain with psychology is everything to do with people, the way they think and communication, right? And that's relationships. Mm-hmm. That's your relationships with your associates, your coworkers, your bosses, business partners, anybody that you're dealing with is going to be associating with things like this. So my question is, how do you find that line to be able to split between communicating with the associates as friends rather than communicating with them as a manager?
Yeah, that's a good point that you bring up, and I think part of the strategy for me has something to do with I think it's a psychology term actually, the hot stove effect, and it has to do with how people receive or learn or are disciplined, and basically what it says is similar to putting your hand on a hot stove, that disciplinary action should be taken immediately and they should be the same each time for the same consequence, and that's kind of how people learn. And so from the onset, when we're working with friends or when we develop those relationships that are a little bit stronger than maybe just employee to manager, or even if we had those relationships outside of work already, I think that it's really important that from the onset that we had boundaries established, and that when certain criteria weren't met, when certain goals weren't hit, that the same consequences applied to our friends, quote unquote, as to really anybody who we dealt with. A good example is that one of the places that we worked together and we worked with some friends was a very well-known car rental place. With that being said, we had a specific goal that every car that came into the office was cleaned every night before we went home. They had to be ready to rent at the beginning of the next day. And it was a hectic morning at that place. And sometimes we had, over the course of a day, 50, 60 cars return. And if it was our friends out there, or if it was some employee that we hired off of a job site, the expectation remains the same. We ultimately have a business to run, and it's entirely fine if one of our friends doesn't want to participate at the level that we would require them to. But ultimately, what that comes down to is that maybe then they shouldn't ultimately work for the company, because whether it was me, whether it was you, whether it was any manager, John Smith, they would be held accountable for their actions, and we all are in life. Right. And I think that it's unfair. I personally feel that level of unfair when we would treat somebody who's a friend different than we would treat any other employee. And so I wouldn't say that I'm perfect. I wouldn't say that you were perfect at maintaining those boundaries, but ultimately it's something that you just have to be cognizant of. You have to be aware that there's that bias, or that you have that tendency to favor one person or another, so that you can actively counteract it. And
So that's kind of funny because there's an actual term called self-therapy for a therapist, and just the idea behind it is you're always working on yourself, acknowledging your personal biases and views, so that when you are helping others, the goal is to not incorporate them into these perspectives. And sometimes that becomes almost impossible, but the idea is, again, every day you're working on it more, and the biggest thing you can do is identify it, acknowledge it, and then actually put in steps and efforts to make a difference on it. So awesome, man. Thank you so much. So let's go ahead with the next one. So this one's gonna be so dealing with kind of like conflict, right? So like when you were in a situation where you had two employees at either of your facilities that you had managed at, how did you deal with conflicting employees?
that's a good question as well. We try to keep conflict to a minimum. I would say is probably the ultimate goal, but it's inevitable that it's going to happen.
Right.
And I think that each conflict that is created or that we become aware of, we deal with them maybe a little bit differently, or we maybe approach them in a little bit different way. But I think that ultimately what it comes down to is that when you have two people that are in conflict in some capacity, it's important to air out the situation. There's a lot of times that happens where one party is thinks that the other person thinks something else, or what have you. So I think that the first step is kind of airing out the conflict. And then ultimately what it comes down to is that we really hold a responsibility to kind of facilitate some type of common ground between these two people, to kind of put ourselves in the position to help each one of them understand each other's viewpoints, why they might be coming to those conclusions, how each other feel. And by doing so, I think you gain a lot of respect in the process as well as a manager. But yeah, I think that ultimately, I think that it's a constant race of coming to compromise and making each party feel like the compromise was maybe shifted in their favor, if that makes sense.
I think what's important in any leader, and this is again why I am trying to emphasize why I think it would benefit a lot of people if they understood psychology a little bit more, if they just even grabbed a foundation of just kind of like how people think, why they think, and just kind of be a little bit more curious and more understanding that there's different thought processes on anything. So
well, if I could interject, I mean, it has been immensely helpful to hear your take on real business situations and be able to understand, because you're 100% right. You're 100% right that understanding how people think and why they think the way that they do, that makes you more effective at mitigating conflict, at motivating people, at all of the different things that
I'd say communication just in general.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like it's a matter of when you have that understanding, you can listen to somebody. Again, I think a lot of it pertains to, we right now are dealing with, I would say a lot of people are very willing to vocalize their opinions, but not a lot of people are willing to listen. I think it takes a lot to be able to just listen to what the other person has to say and really absorb it in, and then articulate a response so that you can respond to them accordingly, and hopefully in a way that helps them, because that's, at the end of the day, that's the goal. The goal is to resolve the problem, and you're not going to always be able to resolve things, but at least I would agree with you. I think anybody who feels like they were listened to is going to have respect for that person. And I think as a leader, that's a very important aspect to have.
I think that we've talked about this many times, and I think that really what it comes down to is being heard and understood is almost equivalent to like a basic human need in a working environment. People need to understand the motivation behind certain moves that the business makes. It's not enough anymore for me to be able to say, employee, I need you to do X, and you're going to do X because I said so.
That's awful.
That doesn't make anybody feel good, and to be honest, it doesn't make me feel good at all. I did not go into management to be somebody's boss, to earn respect based on my job title. I want to prove my worth to my employees each day that I interact with them.
And I would say that's what makes you a leader, bud. If
I
I were
appreciate
to pinpoint anything, it's the fact that you're willing to put employees before yourself in a position that you have authority over them. I even watched a video not that long ago that was expanding on, I think I even sent it to you, that it was just expanding on the fact that when you have a leader that feels responsible for their team and puts all of that responsibility upon themselves, that's a leader. That when something goes down, the leader is the one that takes responsibility behind it. When something goes good, that leader pushes the employee that did the good job, right? Like management gets paid more money because they are responsible for more problems. They are the face of the negative aspect of the business, and they're the ones to deal with it, and they're also the ones to push the employees the hardest. And not everybody's a leader. I think it's important for people to understand that not everybody's meant to be a manager, a leader, a boss, and that's okay.
Right.
I think it's important for people to look at their strengths and expand on their strengths more. And if that falls into a leadership position, that's going to naturally happen, or at least I believe it will. Whereas I think people should try to focus on how they can benefit themselves in a way that they can benefit society. But I also have a view that I think it's important for people to benefit society and not so much always about themselves. That'd be a different topic, but so
you mentioned something really quickly though.
Yeah.
That's important. That you touched on the fact that not everybody's meant to be a manager. And I think back over my years of leading teams, we've led teams of 12 people, we've led teams of 300. and throughout that entire time, I can't think of many times that an employee was grossly insubordinate with something that we had kind of put forth. But any time that it was the case that we were dealing with specific gross insubordination, I can't remember a single time where it crossed my mind, or when you would have heard words out of my mouth that said, because I'm your boss, or because I told you so. It's cringy for me to hear that statement, and it should resonate with folks that ultimately that there are ways to motivate a team that go beyond because I'm higher up in the organizational chart.
Now this is just me being me. Just out of curiosity, bud, has anybody told you that, either when you were younger or in previous jobs? Did you ever have a manager or somebody that was responsible for you to say, do what I said because I'm your boss, I'm me, whomever? Has that ever happened to you?
I don't think anybody specifically said it to me, because I try not to exhibit gross insubordination myself. I'm generally the type of person that's like, hey, if I don't agree with the direction or I can't get behind it, then maybe our relationship as an employee and employer maybe we're not just meant to be. But ultimately, for most things, I try to be pretty amicable, I'd say. But I think that I've noticed that I've worked with other leaders other managers, who utilize that as the means to get things done or to take action. I have found that no matter kind of where we've gone in our management career, that folks have been willing to get behind something that we've said that needed to be done, or a directive or whatever, because they wanted us to succeed. They wanted to see us do well. They wanted to be along on the ride when our whole team's winning. they appreciated that we passed that praise along to them, like you said before, and they appreciated when we shielded them from maybe some of the negative consequences from maybe our upper management or corporate or whatever the case may be. So to answer your question directly, yes, I've worked with many people who manage in that way, who 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 operate in that way that is like, yes, because I've worked here longer, because I've earned this position, you're going to do what I say. No input from you, the employee, and that's just the way that it is.
Yeah. So it wasn't a personal experience happening to you. You witnessed it.
I'd say I witnessed it much more often because, again, I try not to put myself in that general position.
No, I don't blame you. I don't think anybody really responds well to that.
No.
It's a very older generation thought process, and I understand that at the time it was viewed as respect and it was different. With technology nowadays, with the capability of learning things at an earlier age without requiring all the experience, I just don't see a reasoning behind needing some or behaving like that anymore, like to justify behaving like that. So I would agree with you. So all right, so my final question, at least for this category, is going to be, what was your biggest challenge as a manager?
Oh man,
biggest
challenge. So,
nitty and gritty.
I'd say that I think that one of the biggest challenges that a lot of people are going to encounter are dealing with multiple different people and the way that they communicate, and everybody kind of receiving that differently. I think that that's an easy answer though, and I think that my answer is a little bit different than that. I think that the biggest challenge for me in any given situation was kind of earning the respect of our employees and maybe other managers that we worked with, other folks that have been in the company, and kind of negotiating that odd transaction of, why is this guy 10 years younger than us and ultimately in the same spot? It can create resentment. It can make people feel awkward. It can enrage certain employees that we dealt with that were, I mean, maybe our parents' age or so, and ultimately we had to earn their respect. And I think it kind of plays into that other thing that I was saying, as far as everybody kind of communicates a little bit differently, receives feedback a little bit differently, deals with conflict a little bit differently. They have a bunch of their own life experiences that create the lens that they view the world through. But I think that was probably the biggest thing. It's kind of negotiating this path through management and trying to expedite my way through, but all the while knowing that it can create some friction maybe between some folks that I would interact with. And so there's a lot of, I think of an example when we worked for a pretty big retailer, and we had a lot of employees. Actually, I would say a fair majority of our employees were older than us and in different stages of life. And I think we did a really good job of earning their respect. I think that we, again, were able to create a team of people who wanted to run through brick walls for us. And what it really came down to is that those people knew that, again, we had their best interests in mind. We earned their respect in the way that they needed it to be earned. And I think that it translated a long way towards our success with that company when we worked for them. And I think that ultimately what it comes down to is that we treated them like humans. We treat everybody that we come in contact, with, I try, and I know you try as well, and that's, probably why we connect so well, is that we try in every interaction that we have, at least in this stage of our lives as adults, to treat everybody that we come in contact with the proper level of respect, and give people the benefit of the doubt, and be kind, just generally kind in the world. Because what else do we have other than fostering good relationships, putting out good into the world? We're not here for a long time, so I think it's important that our time here and on the earth, we're able to really just inject some good, like you said.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's a lot of happiness behind being able to push others to do better, being able to motivate others to do better, to be able to, when there's a problem, they feel comfortable coming to you to talk to you. Hey, I've got this going on. What can I do? That takes a lot for somebody to be vulnerable with somebody else, right?
You're right.
So when you have people feeling comfortable enough to be able to come to you with their problems, I do think it creates a level of respect that is not in any comparison, I think. And yeah, I think there's a lot of happiness in helping others. I think I think our society could benefit from trying to help others more than focusing so much on individually. I do think it's very important for people to understand, though, that you start with yourself and then you can help others. But when I tell people you start with yourself, right?
Seriously though, amen to that, because that is something that I learned. I almost learned it too late, that you can't pour out of an empty glass. And that really resonated with me. And I really started to focus on, like, you need to be better about yourself. You need to have healthy relationships in your own life and be able to be intrinsically happy and intrinsically be able to mitigate conflict and things like that, so that you can help other people do it. Because you end up burning yourself out and burning the end of the candle, or burning the candle at both ends, when you are constantly trying to give, but ultimately you don't have anything to give anymore. So yeah, that really resonated with me, that you said that, because it is it's probably it's something that you hear often in our casual dealings with psychology, but at the same time, I don't think a lot of people put it into practice.
No.
When folks are dealing with a conflict, whether it's with their spouse, with their employees, whatever, you have to work on you first to be able to work on somebody else at all, or to even have a chance.
I agree. The most important thing I would encourage people to understand is you can't control what somebody else does. You cannot control what somebody else thinks. You cannot control what somebody or does, anything of that nature. You can't control anything outside of what you do, your actions. You really can't even control the thoughts that come in your brain, but you can control whether or not you go through with thoughts or pursue things like that, right? That it makes a very big difference. But when you understand that you cannot control what someone else does, but you can control you and what you say and what you do, then you look at that problem very differently, because now you're not saying, well, it's that person. They need to figure it out. That problem's not going away if it's going to be their problem to figure out.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because that is, I've taken that phrase to heart a lot over the course of really just working on myself as an individual. And I think it's something that's, kind of been relatively new for me, as far as like working on myself as an individual. But that phrase means a lot to me, in that you can control your own reaction to situations. And I have to say that it in any given, I had my girlfriend and I had a little bit of, not an argument, but disagreement or what have you, where we were kind of going after each other and for a quick second. And she said that, and it honestly stopped me in my tracks. And it was like the one thing through all of our conversation that I was able to connect with and be able to say, damn, you're right. You're right. I mean, there's no other, you don't have any excuse for that. You can control the way that you react to things. You can't control the outside world, but it is, I just thought it was important that I mentioned that. It ultimately has meant a lot to me as of recent. And again, if you ever find yourself in an argument, feel free to throw that out there.
Yeah. An important thing that I learned, especially with going to school for marriage and family therapy is when you're in a relationship and the problem arises, most people tend to look at this problem as him versus her, or partner one versus partner two. If you adjust your mindset and you take it, all right, it's us versus this problem. How are we going to fix this problem? You've now not made your partner a enemy. You've now made them an ally. And now you separate the problem so that you can actually attack
really
it
good.
together, right?
Yeah, no,
so
that's good.
That would always be the idea anytime you're looking at a problem as a couple. All right, so we are going to start now the second segment. So this is going to be now focusing a little bit more on therapy stuff. So I am a marriage and family therapist student. I am exploring more, and I want to expand this knowledge to everybody because I think there's so many people that can benefit from therapy as either individually or couples relationship. Again, this focuses on being able to help communication. It has nothing to do with always being something negative. It's very common to be associated with negativity, and my job here is I want to be able to help people see a different way of looking at therapy in not a negative way, right? So I have a couple misconceptions here that I'm going to be talking about with Joey. I just want to get your perspective on this, right? So this is just, you've never been to therapy. I know you and I have talked. We've talked about a couple different things that I've learned throughout the time. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
you're my relationship therapist. So thank you.
But well, thank you. So this is just going to be. I'm just curious to know what's your take on this. Do you agree with these concepts? Why? And just kind of your thought process of what you've learned over your time with these. So the first concept is going to be therapy is meant for crazy people. Yeah, it's a fun one to start with.
Yeah, that is fun to start with. That one, I would say that I have a different take on that now, and it's really, I would say that it's really only through knowing you that I've kind of developed this take, but I wouldn't have said that it's for crazy people. I don't. I think that, like Dr. Phil, we don't use the word crazy. It's derogatory. But with that being said, I think that it, in my mind, for a lot of time, it was associated with folks that had mental illness, who were unable to cope with specific life situations, who maybe lacked development in certain areas. But what I've come to find out is that, just like anything else in life, we all lack development in some areas. We all can stand to be a little bit better in the way that we communicate. We all can stand to have one more tool in our tool belt for diffusing a conflict, whether it's with an employee, an employer, your spouse, whatever. But one thing that you kind of taught me is that there is a vast market out there for therapy to be used in preventative capacity. And I now work in healthcare, and I work for a entity that is very much so based in prevention and wellness. Mm-hmm. And similarly, just like you would take care of your physical body, you can also stand to take care of your mind and how you approach problems and how you deal with conflict, and so on and so forth. So to answer very shortly, I think I've changed my position on this over the years through the help of just educating myself and understanding what goes into this process and what you're going through as a student. I think that I've drastically matured in the area of how to utilize therapy effectively.
I would say that is awesome, because I'm glad I was at least able to help you see some of the benefits. That is my end goal, to be able to try to show people the benefits of addressing these things prior. So therapy, it's kind of funny. I used to work at a chiropractic office, right? And one of the things I learned a lot about was the body and how pain works. And typically when you have an injury, pain is the last symptom to show up, right? Pain's the last symptom to show up, but the first one to typically go away, which is kind of crazy. I associate going to a chiropractor would be equivalent to like going to therapy in the sense of you go to a chiropractor to address pain when you have problems going on, when you have anger, when you have feelings that aren't being addressed, when you have emotional outbursts, when you have things that are happening in your life that you can't control and you can't explain. That's typically then when people feel like they have to go to therapy. Just like how people will commonly only go to a chiropractor when they're in pain. But again, these flare-ups is the final outcome of these injuries, right? So if you go to therapy prior to these flare-ups, it gives you an opportunity to be able to try to address them so that you limit those flare-ups or potentially prevent them from happening. And depending on how long you've been dealing with this could be a childhood trauma that you've never acknowledged or even like realized or pay attention to because you didn't know. You just kind of ignored it and played on. The reason why so many people can benefit from therapy is because everybody's parental trauma was passed down to their children. And then you're going to pass down those traumas to your children if you don't address them, right? If you address them or at least acknowledge that they exist, you are giving yourself an opportunity to be able to break the chain. But if you don't know it exists, you can't break that chain, right? So this is where I try to tell people, even couples therapy. When people go to couples therapy, they'll normally go to couples therapy as a last resort. If you go to couples therapy as a last resort, it's not going to work. You go to couples therapy when you are having problems in the beginning, you are going to learn different ways of communicating. You're going to learn different ways to be able to talk to each other. You're going to learn different ways to be able to listen to each other and how you can try to implement these things. These are just simple things that you would typically get from therapy. And what's really important for people to understand as well is there's a difference between a licensed therapist, a psychologist, and a psychiatrist. So a licensed therapist is just somebody who has their therapy certification. They more than likely have their master's degree. If they are a psychologist, then they more than likely have their doctoral in psychology and in therapy. And then if they are a psychiatrist, they have the capability of prescribing medication. So that is where it's a big difference. So if you don't want to involve medication into your life while dealing with stuff like this, you can go to a therapist or a psychologist and be able to get treatment without medication. Now, they may refer you to a psychiatrist if there's medication needed for different diagnosis, but you don't have to go in thinking that you're going to get medication right away. So at least it's important to be able to distinguish the differences, but I will say personally, I think there's a lot of things that can be dealt with without medication. I'm a big advocate
Absolutely.
of that.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead. Next misconception is going to be the therapist has all the answers and will tell you what to do. What do you think about that?
So I have, I think, been to therapy maybe once or twice as a young child.
Really? I didn't know that.
I think I have. Yeah, I definitely did at one point. It was when I was really, really young. And I went with my brother, actually. We both went to the same therapist and kind of had adjoining conversations or what have you. But I think at that time, why I had such an originally negative perception of the benefits of psychology was because I went into it with that expectation. I came out of that meeting or those conversations and said, well, me and my brother are still going to fight in the morning, or whatever it was that we were dealing with at the time. And I didn't feel like they really offered any value. It seemed like they were just giving us nonsensical advice and maybe joke-worthy tips and tricks. It kind of seemed to me like they were maybe checking off a box or something like that. And it didn't feel like I really got the answers that I was looking for. I didn't feel solved. With that being said, I now, understand that they are there to provide an outlet for you. I now understand that they're not necessarily the answer to your own problems. You're the answer to your own problems. But they give you alternate viewpoints and tools and tips and ways to kind of frame problems or approach them or have conversations so that you can be effective in dealing with the actual issue yourself,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is very important. Just as a consumer of general psychology, I think that it's very important that people would understand that there is probably, and I'm sure you're going to elaborate on it as well, but there is probably seldom services in the world that exist in psychology to be able to say, yep, we're going to solve your problem. First visit, second visit, by the 10th visit, we guarantee you'll be solved. And that's why it's oftentimes a little bit of a process. But yeah, I think personally, I think now I definitely don't believe that a therapist does have all the answers. And I think that's by design.
Mm-hmm.
They're not.
With the teaching of going through the schooling of it, the idea is the client is their own expert of their own lives. And it's 100% true, because how am I supposed to know anything you've gone through if I've never gone through it? It's impossible, right? So a therapist will never have all the answers. To your point where you said after so many visits, you'll be solved. There's a reason why it's called a practice, right? So you've experienced this now with dealing with the medical field. There's no certainty in anything when it comes to health.
Is that why it's called a practice?
That's why it's called a practice. Yeah.
I work for a practice and I didn't know that.
Yeah. So because they're practicing medicine, right? So and that's the idea. At the end of the day, the therapist is going to have multiple approaches. Just like kind of, again, it's funny, I'm only going to associate this with the chiropractic office because I work there, but similar to a chiropractor, they have multiple ways of doing one adjustment, right? So a therapist has more than one way of being able to communicate with someone with different methods. So there's strategic therapy, there's cognitive behavior therapy, there's narrative therapy, and all of these different types of interventions build a different environment of trying to approach that problem. And again, the goal is to separate the problem so it can be addressed and identified and be able to be worked on. But the client is going to be the expert. They're always going to know what's going to be the best. And the therapist is never really going to tell you, hey, so this is what you're going to do and this is going to fix that problem. The therapist's job is going to be, okay, so how do you think you're going to fix this problem? How do you, what goals can you create that you find achievable to be able to get you to Z? Right? So we got to make A, B, and C first and eventually go down the alphabet, and then where our goal is going to be Z. Now, we don't know how we're going to get to Z yet. We're going to probably try a couple different avenues and see how we can get there the most effective way. But what happens is at the end of that, you now have the capability of being able to replicate that again. So if you have couples that come in for communication problems, they can't talk to each other, yelling at each other. If they learned how to deal with that problem, next time that problem presents itself again, they now have something to be able to utilize to be able to work on it. Say it doesn't work. So you go back and you try a different method. And yes, unfortunately, sometimes it takes a long time to do it. Sometimes even when couples therapy, you have to do individual therapy because sometimes there's things individually that you have not addressed yet that you don't even know exist. That's one of the biggest problems when it comes to the brain. Subconscious problems, it's very difficult to identify because you don't know it exists. It's subconscious, right? Yeah. So it's like it inherently makes it very difficult to be able to address it because it's in your subconscious mind. But if you're willing to talk about it, then it makes it a little bit easier. I think another way to be able to identify these things is identifying what scenarios make you uncomfortable.
I would have to agree. I've always sought out certain situations that make me uncomfortable just so that I can get it out of my head.
Yeah, grow.
I'm kind of like a high-strung individual, if you can't tell sometimes. Yeah. And so I need those experiences to be able to do that. I need to be able to say like, oh yeah, I did that and that was just fine, so that I then have frame of reference to compare other things to. But something that you mentioned earlier on is vulnerability. You, as an individual, I should say, I shouldn't direct people. I'm not a therapist. But I would challenge other individuals to up their level of vulnerability. and find some type of avenue where you can be as close to completely vulnerable as possible, because until you do so, you are missing out on saying and speaking and walking through and exploring things that are deep down inside of you that you will not let out. You won't share with anybody. And thankfully we've had that similar relationship as to where I do feel like I could pretty much tell you anything. And that allows me to really be able to work through solutions by verbalizing it and by acknowledging it and putting it out there. It really, really helps me. So again, I do not claim to give advice on psychology.
No, yeah, but I think what's so important with this is these are things that most people, like a lot of people know this stuff, right? So like we have learned so much by just experiencing life, and all psychology does is put a name to it. Now we know, like, okay, this is that. This is how I can replicate it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I almost feel like most people understand when they've experienced this stuff. You're just going to inherently learn because we communicate with people every day. You're like, it's impossible for you not to start picking up cues. You start picking up patterns. And I think that, so when you can notice a pattern, then you have the capability of being able to adjust the pattern if you need to. Mm-hmm. So, and things like that is super important to be able to adjust your life. And easier said than done, don't get me wrong, right? Sure. But it's when people can be able to identify this stuff, it's incredible how much it can help as an individual. But again, I think it's hard for most people to be willing to look back at themselves and be like, I'm the problem. I think if people could do that, I can tell you it would be incredible how our society would change in the way we view
everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
But just
that feels good for me.
Yeah.
I swear it sounds stupid, but when I'm able to recognize myself as the problem, whether it's a situation, relationship wise or whatever, when I'm able to do that, that feels so good.
Well, because you have an understanding that that's going to help you grow. You already know that you will grow from that.
I do. And I see it as a change from the high school version of me or the childhood version of me, which lacked those conflict solving skills. And so to be able to step back from an argument with your spouse or what have you and be able to go in there and say, look, I've thought about it, and through reflection, I just have been able to understand that was entirely my fault. I apologize. That feels great.
Yeah.
That feels really good because I feel myself coming into a different era as far as awareness in other people's emotions.
Yeah.
Including that personal circle. I probably always held that at work because of the positions that we've been forced into or what have you, but in personal life now, being able to say, hey, I don't need to be necessarily always right or always in control. This is a little bit of a dance. It's a little bit of a give and take. And when you're able to kind of come into that on your own, I have to say it feels really great.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's funny to that. I would get a lot of people that love to, it sounds like my daughter's home. Happy second birthday to my beautiful little daughter, Jupiter. She turned 2 years old today.
Happy birthday. Oh, it's today?
Today.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
all right.
She turned 2 years old today.
Tomorrow?
Yeah, we're doing a big party tomorrow.
Very good.
All right, so let's go ahead and we'll finish this up. I just really have one more quick question, or not really a question, I guess. But what would you say would be a good advice for somebody who is going to be finishing now their degree in business management, right? So it's a huge degree. So many people get the degree, but not a lot of people do anything with it. So what would you recommend as an advice for somebody who's finishing their degree and they're going to be pursuing their next part of their life?
That's a great point. If you have gotten your business management degree and you don't do anything with it, shame on you.
Accurate.
No, but ultimately, I think that what has been really important for me is kind of what we had mentioned before, trying out as much as possible, experiencing as much as you can, going to those uncomfortable meetings, speaking up when it feels uncomfortable to do so, and applying for, that job that you don't think you're going to get. Because if you do, it will give you the immense opportunity to grow. It will allow you to fast track your personal development like you've not been able to see. And there's this thing called imposter syndrome, and it's evident in all workplaces that I've worked in. But at the end of the day, you are only as good as you think you are, and you gain a better picture of how you view yourself through having accomplished as much as you can in the field. And so whether you're just starting out or kind of, resetting your career, I personally say seek out those opportunities that are uncomfortable. Thrust yourself into as many different situations that you've not experienced before so that you can experience them, so you have a frame of reference for next time. And ultimately, I think that by experiencing as much as you can, you develop your, like you had mentioned, your psychology skill set, even without knowing that you've done so, because you've had so much more opportunity. I don't think that I'm smarter than anybody else, or I don't think that I'm better at negotiating conflict or anything like that, but I can say for our age, I've been put in positions that sometimes other people haven't. And so maybe I come with a different set of skills. Maybe I've talked to a different level of leadership. Maybe I've been privy to information that other people have not yet. And so I've felt that that's kind of what's been allowed me to kind of fast track my career and get to where I want to be. But ultimately, I think that at the end of the day, you really just have to find out what you want to do and love it. Yeah. Because whatever you do, psychology, business, working at a car wash, it doesn't matter. You just have to really enjoy it, because again, don't have a lot of time to do it.
I agree. Anything you pursue, you should definitely love it. Joey, thank you so much for doing this, man.
Absolutely,
this is the first of many, and I hope you come back on. We'll do this again, and we'll talk about more stuff. But again, thank you so much, bud.
Dude, my pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe, like the channel, comment down if you have any questions. I'd love to get your perspective.
We need to help out that algorithm.
Yes, please. But the goal is we want to get more of this information out there. So please, if you have any questions that you want addressed, if anybody that would love to be on the podcast to provide a different perspective, I want to talk to anybody, everybody. The goal is we want to get more people to understand how we can communicate better, how we can talk to each other better, have a little bit more respect for each other, and be able to just have more dialogue. I think it'll be healthy for everyone to be able to do that.
Yes.
So, Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a good one. Thanks, bud.
Thank you, buddy.